Let me tell you a few things about what the Institute is doing in this area this semester. In addition to this series, we also have a film series in the Browning Cinema in the Barlow Performing Arts Center. We have our own series of films, starting with Paths of Glory by Stanley Kubrick. That's on the 18th of this month. Our staff members have some more of these if you want to take these around, which list all of the films in our series. But there is, in addition to that, a large number of films that Ted Barron, the Associate Director of the Browning Cinema there, has scheduled that also have to do with the First World War and its aftermath. So please check out, a pretty extensive list of offerings in this area there. So many histories of this war have been written and continue to be written, but the focus of this series is going to be on the new things that we need to think about, or the things that we've thought about that need to be rethought. So we have 5 superb lectures to lead us through this. I know that we have some undergraduates in the audience, so let's consider where things stood 100 years ago right now. So back at the end of June, when most of you were doing summer research projects for the Nanovic Institute or sticking your feet in a lake somewhere, an Austro-Hungarian Archduke in Sarajevo was murdered by a young Serb nationalist. The empire issued some ultimatums. The Serbs obeyed 8 or 9 of them. It wasn't enough, so the empire declared war on Serbia and its king. For various reasons, trouble had been brewing in this area for a while, and the trouble has now, as you know, spread all across Europe. A few days before the first day of classes this semester, Germany invaded France by coming quickly through Belgium. There was fighting down through Belgium, now in northern France, large military forces. Last week, the French retreated a little south across the river Marne, which, as you know, is runs east of Paris. They were alongside the British Expeditionary Force, which was there. Reinforcements came to join the French divisions from Paris a few days ago. And you may have heard that they came in about 600 to 1,000 taxicabs from the streets of Paris. And now we've got this massive battle ongoing right now, and the Germans are being pushed back. The French have been pretty successful in dividing them. There are heavy casualties. There are these newfangled things called airplanes, which were just invented about 10 years ago. They're being used for reconnaissance. And the Allies seems to be winning, to the point that the German Chief of Staff, Moltke, has suffered some sort of nervous breakdown and is withdrawing the forces to about 40 miles north of the Marne River, across the River Aisne. They're doing something new. They're digging something that are called trenches. They weren't prepared to do this, but now they're waiting for continued attacks. Here to tell us more about the causes, conduct, and the consequences of this mess is Professor of Political Science Dan Lindley. He co-directs Notre Dame's International Security Program and is also a fellow of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. After working in D.C. for a congressman, the Center for Defense Information, the Brookings Institution, Mr. Lindley did his graduate work in the Security Studies program at MIT. Princeton published his first book, Promoting Peace with Information, which is why you'll see statistics on the screen, in 2007. He's been speaking and publishing on War and Peace ever since at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard, the Sciences Po in Paris, and of course here at Notre Dame. So please welcome a Nanovic Fellow, Professor Dan Lindley.
Thank you very much. So the question is, what's changed from then to now? Nowadays, the French would take Uber to the battlefield instead of the taxis that they did back then. So by way of prefatory remarks, who here, assuming you're President of the United States, who here would have fought World War I? Send our troops into battle, think it's worth the trouble. Anybody here would have fought World War I? Okay, a couple hardliners in the back and maybe a yawn up here, not sure. Who would not have fought World War I? Quite a bit more hands, still people laying low, but interesting. So we'll see how you guys feel about that at the end of the talk. So who cares about World War I anymore? It's very important in history. It was known back then as the Great War, the war to end all wars. unfortunately, that did not turn out to be the case. Some 10 million or so military people, soldiers were killed, another 7 million or so civilians were killed, and maybe 23 million people were wounded in the course of World War I. One can argue that the Turkish, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian empires died in the war. One can argue that the US continued its route to dominating the West and becoming one of the most powerful countries in the world as a result of being on the winning side in World War I and tilting the balance at the end. One should argue that the League of Nations was born as a result of World War I, and the Treaty of Versailles was also a result of World War I. And so it's possible, to the extent that the Treaty of Versailles helped cause World War II, that we are laying the seeds for the Second World War, which was an even huger conflagration and far more tragic. So there's lots to be seen in World War I. From a scholarly point of view, this is one of the most studied of all wars, and lots of work has been done in the archives, interviewing dead people, so lots of research there. And what have we learned? We've learned that everything causes war. For every scholar who studies it, there's a new theory about the causes of war. So I'm going to outline some of the major ones today and give you some sense of perspective, some of the different scholarship there. Because so many causes of war manifest in World War I, it helps us teach a lot about the causes of war more generally, because frequently these things recur. And one of the themes of this talk is to think about where are there situations in today's world where there are tight alliances or radical ideologies or militarism is prevalent. Think about those things, because when you think about them, you might think, well, it might not cause World War I, that's sort of impossible, but it could get us into trouble in other places. So World War I is something of a Rorschach test for scholars who see in it all sorts of different causes, depending on their bent. So for some people, it's a result of miscalculation, misperception, nationalism. For other people, it's a result of strategic choices made rationally. Maybe Germany did it on purpose for gain or for preventive war. So with that, let's start out with looking at some of the general causes of World War I. But let's start with a little mystery that Anthony alluded to. And this is known as the July crisis. So you'll note the date, June 29. Archduke is killed. This might be known as an act of terrorism in today's world. So you can think, could an assassination help provoke war? Is it possible that 2 beheadings are going to throw us into more conflict? So in any case, this is June 29th, slain by assassins' bullets. As Anthony mentioned, and I'll be describing a little bit later, there was a July crisis with an ultimatum that Serbia generally accepted but rejected one of the claims. So upon the rejection, Austria declares war on Serbia. You'll note that the New York Times cost a penny back then. It was well worth a penny because they couldn't spell Serbia, could they? So Austria declares war on Serbia. This is July 29th, so a month after the assassination. So Russia's threatening, already moving troops, peace of Europe in Kaiser's hands. So a month later, things are beginning to turn sour. The next day, holy cow, right? Things are turning bad very fast, aren't they? So the next day, Russia expects war, mobilizes 1.2 million men. The Tsar summons reservists to the colors, Belgrade's bombarded, Kaiser's debating whether to go to war himself. So many buildings damaged. Okay, August 2nd, Germany joins the fray, declares war on Russia, and actually then wheels over to attack France. So France is mobilizing, may be drawn in tomorrow. We have to rescue our own people and get them out. So, can you imagine the quickness of this happening? This is the fundamental mystery I'm trying to point out for you guys. There are other mysteries too, but We'll get to that in just a second. So England's going to protect the French coast. It had pledged to defend Belgium since 1830. Germany recalls its envoy. Germany's hesitating at the French frontier. And a German liner slips out of New York in war paint. Now, that's one of the big mysteries of the lecture. How does a German liner slip out of New York in war paint? So war's being declared. You say, Achtung, time to go down to the Lowe's and buy some war paint, yeah? And so they rushed down, they went to Lowe's, got some war paint, and painted it overnight, and left the... I don't know the answer to this mystery, but there it is. We're trying to figure it out. Okay, so, big mystery here. How did this thing start so quickly? What things were in play? There must have been background factors. So let's walk through that. First of all, tight alliances and all-or-nothing mobilization. General argument here is that big countries were allied to lesser countries, so if the small states got into trouble, it would bring in the big states. The big states had mobilization plans, so that if they mobilized to help save the smaller states, they would be mobilizing for general war in Europe, and I'll explain a little bit how that went. So again, tight alliances and all-or-nothing mobilization. So here's Europe. Okay, so Austria-Hungary had been seeing its empire decline for quite some time, and what little vestige of power that it had outside of its own territory was down in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which it had annexed in 1908. And a lot of people in Bosnia-Herzegovina were Muslims or Serbians, and so they weren't at all happy to have their territory annexed here. So that's why the assassination occurred. But what was important was if Austria-Hungary lost this area and it went under Serbian control, they would have felt like their empire was going down even more than it had. So its empire was at stake in trying to maintain influence and control over Bosnia-Herzegovina and trying to resist the advances of Serbia. So Austria-Hungary was at stake there. Germany was allied to Austria-Hungary, and Germany felt that its influence in the world rested on maintaining alliance with Austria-Hungary. So in that sense, Germany was tied to Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary was wrapped up in the Balkans, and therein lies some trouble. Russia, of course, people who mobilized 1.2 million troops along this entire border, was Entente allies with France and joined in the Entente later by Great Britain. So these powers were all allied against Germany and Austria-Hungary. Here is Belgium, which I mentioned Great Britain had pledged to defend. So if Germany goes into Belgium, then Great Britain gets drawn into the war. So what ends up happening here with tight alliances and all-or-nothing mobilization is that when Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, Russia wants to defend its ally Serbia, so it mobilizes, and it mobilizes all across the front. This, of course, threatens Germany, and Germany mobilizes to do what? To execute its Schlieffen Plan, which is to attack through Belgium into France, defeat France, and wheel back and deal with the Russians. That was their war plan. So to defend against Serbia, Russia mobilizes. Germany goes through Belgium into France, and pretty soon the world's at war. The European world is at war. So tight alliances and all-or-nothing mobilization. Okay. Nationalism is another factor here. Nationalism is typically defined as devotion to interests or culture of another nation, aspiring for national independence to get out from domination. But we're talking about more than nationalism in this case. Nationalism taken to hyper-nationalism with strong doses of social Darwinism. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Austin, don't let that happen again. Okay, so here we are talking about social Darwinism, the idea that nations have to fight each other to show their worth. Pretty neat thing. It's just like Darwinism, right? Who's the winning animal? Who's the top dog? You get there by fighting. Now, are you likely to have a war when people think fighting is good? right? Most of us in the room, I hope, think fighting is bad, right? I can be deterred. Hopefully you can be deterred. But if you think fighting's good, you're going to say, come on, Lindley, let's do it to see who's best. So let's have a little example of this social Darwinism and what it looks like. This is by General Friedrich Bernhardi, Germany in the Next War, published in 1912 but written in 1911. And we'll find some really interesting ways of thinking here. So this is something, if you ever read a book like this, say published by Putin, well, you know, you really don't want to read this book published by Putin, do we? Okay, so the right to make war, the duty to make war. Does that sound peaceful? Germany's historical mission, world power or downfall. Uh-oh, right? Red alert, alarm bells going off. So what does this sound like? Well, basically, we don't like peace very much. This desire for peace has rendered most civilized nations anemic and marks a decay of spirit and political courage. The desire for peace renders nations anemic. This aspiration to peace is directly antagonistic to the great universal laws which rule all life. War is a biological necessity of the first importance, a regulative element in the life of mankind which cannot be dispensed with, since without it, war, an unhealthy development will follow which excludes every advancement of the race and therefore all real civilization. Quote, war is the father of all things, unquote. So here we have Germany in the Next War, and that's a great example of the social Darwinism. It existed not just in Germany, but to lesser extents in other countries as well. But this is certainly the writings of someone who's very hard to deter and may in fact want war and think their country is going to profit from it. Kind of interesting. Okay, how about imperialism? Let's throw some imperialism. Austin. Austin's a former student and a great guy, and I can trust him to say, Lindley, you're not doing things right. So don't let the graphic go nuts. Okay, so I'd rather blame a student than me, because I have a tie and he doesn't, right? So, okay, so it's the natural order, isn't it? That power, right? Brute power of having a tie is the way life ought to be. We just read it, didn't we? Yes, ties dominate. Okay, back to reality, here we go. Imperialism. Okay, and the competition for colonies. A little hard to see here, but basically what we see is Africa conquered by all the European powers, divided up until there was nothing more for people to have. And Germany was a rising power, and it felt like it didn't have as much influence as the other countries which had more of Africa. So they competed to take as much as they could. And this led to several crises, where the Moroccan crisis, which I'll talk about shortly, but there's contests of power that helped Germany self-encircle itself. It did stuff like go down to Morocco, sail a ship into the harbor and say, France, would you please give me this colony? And France didn't really like when Germany did that. So it caused self-encirclement, and you can look at it as what political scientists call a security dilemma. If you make yourself stronger, you weaken someone else. In that same sense, this is if somebody has a colony and you don't, you feel weaker. So it's a zero-sum contest for power. And when the last gobble is made and Germany feels like it doesn't have its just due, it gets a little upset. So there were lots of squabbles in here in the lead up to World War I. So World War I didn't exactly come out of the blue. There was lots of geopolitical contest also involved. Austin, yes. Okay, another factor, militarism. Okay, very related to Bernhardi's arguments. This is glorification of the professional military class, predominance of the armed forces in the administration or policy of a state, and a policy in which military preparedness is of primary importance to a state. So if you have military folks in charge, and that's your hammer, any problem you meet is going to look like you're going to have to use that hammer. So that's an overview of militarism. Also, some of the major authors on World War I, Snyder and Van Ever, argue that organizations tend to want size, wealth, and autonomy. And what does that equate to in terms of military doctrine? Being on the offense, right? If you're on the offense, you can control the battlefield, you have better weapons, you get more soldiers. It's harder to go on the offense, so therefore you get more stuff, better budget, better autonomy. So organizational imperatives, amplified by the fact that military has a good influence on the policies of a country, can lead to more offensive strategies, and that was part of the all or nothing mobilization. Militarism, the thought that war is good, all combine into a heady and dangerous combination. And this, by the way, I think is why it's actually very wise to study war. Right? Some people say, study war no more. But actually, had there been more informed civilians able to identify some of these pathologies, maybe the rush to war would have been lessened. So I think it's actually very good to know some of the technical details about mobilizations and militarism, who's in power, what they're trying to say. Don't run away from that, because that's the hard battles that are fought in politics, right? Militaries will be around for a long time. It's better to understand them than to put your head in the sand. Op-ed over. Okay. Perceived offense dominance, another dangerous part of the mix. So offense dominance is when war seems easy, expansion's easy, cost of aggression is low, right? Victory is going to go to those who move first if offense is dominant. If defense is dominant, it's easier to defend. War is costly, you can't go very far without being stopped. But a lot of people thought the offense would be easy. Now imagine this. I'm Germany, and many policymakers in Germany thought, hey, war's going to be over in 6 weeks. We're going to take France, block Russia, 6 weeks. Funny thing is, a lot of people in Russia thought the war would be over in 6 weeks. Now, if everybody's sitting around thinking war's over in 6 weeks with me, the winner, again, the odds of deterrence get lower and lower. People are enthusiastic for war for nationalism reasons because they think they're going to win. And as we know, you can almost say nobody won World War I until right at the end. It was a very hard slog. So people believed in spirit, that you could have enough nationalism to move forward and win in battles. That's what it took, spirit. So when the French lost a battle, they put little red decorations on their uniforms so that the next time they would win. No, did not work out too well. But that's this belief in spirit, moving forward, and gross misinterpretations of offense versus defense dominance, maybe, right? But trenches, machine guns, barbed wire made it very hard to advance. I'm going to talk a little bit about barbed wire and trenches, and then we'll watch a short film clip about how badly things turned out. So, life in trenches was very difficult, very unpleasant. It's hard to see, but this guy's standing watch while these soldiers are sleeping. Lots of boredom. Who knows what this is? A cake gone awry? No. This is German trenches here, so layers of trenches. They could fall back. This is no man's land here. So call this a football field or 3. And then British and French trenches here. So the goal was to hop out of your trench after lots of artillery shells, run across a terrible field filled with indentations and explosions, through artillery, through machine gun fire as you're running. Any volunteers to do a trench run? Quarter mile maybe, through artillery fire? You're not able to even see who's firing at you? No volunteers? Even weenier than people who wouldn't fight World War I. I can't believe it. Austin, you want to? No, I love you too much. So the bell would go off, the whistle blown, and they would hop out of the trench into a hail of machine gun. So can we cue up the video? Unfortunately, this is 3 minutes from Paths of Glory, which might be an ad to watch it, the whole thing. from the Nano, sponsored in the future. They told me it would take a few minutes for the system to transition, and that appears to be true.